Picky eaters can be a tough challenge to crack, and most parents feel that it's their personal responsibility to help their children enjoy a wide variety of foods, vegetables included, and feel somewhat of a sense of failure if their children only want to eat, say, peanut butter and chocolate chips. And I've mentioned this briefly in a previous video, but one thing that can be really helpful in reducing the amount of picky eating that your child exhibits is the concept of division of responsibility. This concept was pioneered by dietitian and feeding expert Ellen Sater more than 3 decades ago, actually, and she fully describes it in her book, Child of Mine, which is one of the nutrition books that I encourage all parents to read. But in short, the division of responsibility suggests that each parent and child has a specific role or responsibility when it comes to feeding. So as a parent, it's your responsibility to decide where, when, and what foods to offer, but it's your child's responsibility to decide whether they will eat, and if so, how much of each food to eat. And as long as each party focuses on their own responsibility, feeding problems like extreme picky eating behaviors will be minimal. Now, I know that it sounds pretty simple, right? But putting it into practice isn't always easy. So in this video, I want to show you some practical tips on how to make the division of responsibility concept work for your family and how to use it to help your picky eater start enjoying a wider variety of foods. There are a few reasons why I personally love this approach to feeding and why I recommend it to a lot of families that I counsel. And the first is that I find that it helps reduce stress around feeding. So from the parent's perspective, it helps reduce stress because you no longer feel that it's your responsibility to make your child eat. So that helps reduce the feeling that you have to plan your meals based on what you think your child may want to eat, which sometimes ends up being really boring meals for you as the adult. And it also reduces the feeling that you have to short order cook. So basically, if your child doesn't like the food that's placed in front of them, you have to come up with an alternative meal or a third meal sometimes. Cook basically completely different meals for different members of your family just to get your children to eat. From the child's perspective, it also reduces stress because they come to learn what to expect around meal times. For example, they'll come to know that each meal will consist of a few foods they may not know or be familiar with, but also a few foods that they already love and enjoy. And they can also trust that there won't be any pressure from their parents as to what foods to eat and how much of each to eat. Second, I find that it helps kids eat for the right rather than the wrong reasons. And what I mean by this is that children will learn to eat not only to please you or to avoid punishment or to earn a reward, like dessert, for example, but rather they'll keep that sense of internal motivation to feeding rather than focus on an external source. And I find that this helps kids grow up into adults that are better in tune with their signals of hunger and satiety, which is a concept that a lot of the adults that I see coming through my office tend to struggle with. Third, I find that this approach to feeding helps avoid that certain foods become more prized than others, such as desserts, whereas other foods become less prized, like the vegetables that need to be eaten in order to get that dessert. And I find that this can help children become less obsessed with certain foods and develop positive feelings about a variety of foods rather than just the prized ones. And overall, I just find that using the division of responsibility as your framework around feeding can take a bit of the guesswork out of feeding, both for you and for your child, which I can only see benefits to. Let me start off by clarifying that this approach to feeding isn't the eat what I put on the table or you'll eat nothing authoritarian type of eating style or feeding style that you might be thinking of, because for the concept of division of responsibility to work, it shouldn't feel like a punishment for your child to eat and there shouldn't be pressure around it, right? So again, as the parent, you need to decide where, when, and what to offer, and the when is really important because you want to make sure that your child is actually feeling hungry before meals. And the best way to do this is to stick to a schedule when it comes to planning meals and snacks as much as possible so that it allows your child to develop hunger between meals and snacks. Because if your child gets to the table and is actually hungry for that meal, the motivation to try new foods will definitely be higher than if they came to the table already full or not really hungry because they had an unscheduled snack or they've been grazing throughout the day. The where is also important, and children actually eat best in a calm environment that's free of distractions. For example, at the dinner table with no iPad and no TV on. And eating at the same time as your child is also helpful because it can help model eating behaviors that you want them to develop. Now for the what, which is the topic that I get the most questions about. I advise parents to start by offering foods that they know that their children will like. So basically foods that you consider safe foods for your child. And this helps instill trust, a trust for your child because they know that there will be foods that they will like and enjoy eating, and trust for you because you know that your child will eat something from the table, despite you having to relinquish control over what exactly they'll be eating and how much of it they'll be eating. And over time, you can start introducing new foods to the mix, or foods that your child only sometimes likes, but not consistently likes. But make sure that there's always at least 1 or 2 foods that are safe foods for your child included in that meal. The Healthy Vegan Plate can help you figure out how to put together a balanced meal, and my video on balanced meal options for vegan kids can remind you of the 3-step approach that I personally use and encourage parents use to ensure that their kids' meals contain all of the nutrients most important for kids, and I'll put links to both of these resources down below. Let's use a concrete example of how I'd put this approach to feeding into practice for a dinner meal. So the first step is that I choose a meal that the adults feel like eating. So let's say that I choose something like a chickpea curry with some coconut milk, some turmeric, some vegetables in there, and some potatoes. Now, I know that my child loves potatoes, and she typically eats them every time I offer her potatoes, so that will be considered her safe food. Safe food number 1. Now, I'm not so sure that she would like the curry. So what I might do is offer the potatoes aside from the sauce, either by cooking them separately or more realistically just taking them out of the curry and rinsing them so they don't taste like the curry so much. And then I might add something else that I know that she usually typically eats, like avocado, diced up avocados on the side of the meal. So that will be her safe food number 2. Now you can either choose to put everything on the table and let your child serve themselves what they want, or pre-plate meals for everyone, making sure that you let your child know that even if there's a food on their plate, they do not have to eat it if they don't want to. I usually pick strategy number 2 just because it's what seems to be working best for our family at the moment. And I'll also sprinkle a little bit of ground flax seeds on her safe foods just to add an extra touch of iron in case she chooses to completely forego eating the new foods, iron-rich chickpeas for example, and focuses to only eat her safe foods. But once that's done, my side of the division of responsibility has been completed, and it's my child's turn to complete hers. So basically she gets to choose what she'll eat and how much of it she'll eat without any pressure from me. And anyways, she's the only one that knows how hungry she is, so it wouldn't really make sense for me to predetermine how much she needs to eat, right? So if she's really hungry, she'll eat everything on her plate and she can have seconds. But if she's not that hungry for that meal, then she'll probably won't finish her plate, and that's fine too. Children don't typically let themselves starve anyways, so when they don't eat so much at one meal, they will make up for it at the next meal or the next snack, or if it's for the dinner meal, probably the next day. So there's nothing really to worry about unless it becomes a trend and they never eat, but that's very rarely the case. So you may be wondering, okay, how do I deal with my child not wanting to eat what I put on the table, or maybe asking for something different to eat? And in this case, I would encourage you to acknowledge your child's feelings, but remain firm in your stance. So for example, I might say something like, it seems like you don't really want to eat the curry tonight. You'd rather eat a popsicle. I can see how that might be really disappointing, but curry is what we have tonight. So that's what we're eating tonight. You may maybe have a popsicle tomorrow for a snack. And then if she still refuses to eat, I might add something like, it seems like you're not really hungry. Are you done with your meal? And if she says no, then I could just encourage her, okay, then go ahead and eat if you want to. But if she says that she's done, I might say something like, okay, let's just wipe your hands. You can go and play next to the table, but Daddy and I will sit at the table and finish our meal. And your meal will be here for you. If you do get hungry in a couple of minutes, you can just come back to the table and eat. It'll be here until the end of the meal. But once the meal is over, we'll put the meal away for you for a later time, so you can eat it when you're actually hungry again. And sometimes she gets off the table and she plays for a little bit, and then she comes back and finishes her meal or eats part of it. But other times she doesn't come back to the table at all, and that's fine too. Then I'll just put everything away, and if she does get hungry before bedtime, for example, I'll just take that leftover that she didn't eat for dinner and offer her that as a snack. Another common question I get is, okay, but what if my child eats all of the potatoes and avocado from her plate and asks for more without ever touching the curry? How do I get my child to actually try the curry? In such a case, I think it's important to remember that children need to be exposed to new foods many times before they accept them, actually on average around 15 times or so. And this is an average, so that means that certain children may require less exposures and others a lot more. So it depends on your child, of course. And also from research, what we know is that pressuring children to try a new food is actually counterproductive. So it gets them to eat less and likely take longer to accept a new food. So personally, I may ask my child if she would like to also taste the curry before offering her more potatoes and avocado. But if she's adamant and she says no, I'd just give her more of the potatoes and the avocado sprinkled with some flax seeds and call it a day. Now, in a case where I know that the curry is not a new food, and usually one that my child does accept, but she'd rather eat something else for that meal that she likes even more, I may say something like, there are no more potatoes at the moment, no more avocado, because we want to keep these foods for leftovers tomorrow, but you can have the curry if you're still hungry. That said, some children may perceive this as pressure, and I definitely don't recommend using this phrasing to get your child to try a new food or a food that you know that they dislike, or to try this phrasing with a child that's an extreme picky eater or very anxious around trying new foods. In the case of a very picky eater or a very anxious eater, I'd probably serve foods family style, leaving them in the middle of the table for each person to take as much or as little as they want of every food. And I definitely make sure that there are at least 1 to 2 safe foods that my child could fall back on. Even if your child does not touch the new foods at first, over time, repeated exposure in a pressure-free environment will work its magic, and your picky eater will most likely expand their palate. I hope this gives you a good introduction to the concept of division of responsibility to feeding and how to practically apply it for your own family. And if you'd like any more tips on how to help your picky eater eat a wider variety of foods, make sure to check out the accompanying article to this video, which I'll link down below. But if you have any more questions, also leave them in the comments. I'll try to answer them all, or if there are enough, depending on the amount, I might just make a separate video to address them all. And with that said, that's it for today. Until next time, ciao ciao!